Okay, Jeffrey, I want to talk to you about Jiro Ono. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Oh, I do.
Okay, Jiro Ono.
Jiro loves sushi.
Yeah, well, not only does he love sushi, he dreams of it. He is the finest, recognized as the finest sushi chef in the world, well into his 80s now, owns a little 10-seat restaurant in a subway station in Japan.
Unbelievable.
And makes fantastic sushi. And yet his story is somewhat informative in terms of a question that I want to ask you, because when we spoke last, we were talking about excellence and the application, dedication that it takes to be truly excellent. And Jiro's life is indicative of that. I mean, he speaks of the fact that when his children were young, he would work from 5 in the morning until 10 at night. And so much so that Sundays, when he would allow himself to sleep in, his son would go to Jiro's wife and say, "Who's this strange man sleeping in our house?" And so, you know, what that reminds us of is that the people who are the very best in the world often do that to the exclusion of other things. They don't have what we might call balance. Mm-hmm. And so that might be one mistake that people make with regard to pursuing a calling. Mm-hmm. So how do we prevent that? We know that God has a degree of balance for us. We know that he has Sabbath rest in mind for us, that he has, you know, he wants us to certainly be focused on the needs of others, and some of those things that sometimes really dialed in calling subverts. How do we strike the right balance in our lives and yet be really good at what he has for us to do?
Well, I think it's simple. First, it gets back to the caller. So in our case with Jiro, who's a beautiful documentary, by the way, very interesting. One of the things is there was no caller there. There was a calling without a caller. Mm. So the caller brings moderation into the calling. So if I call my daughter to, for instance, look, we need to clean the pool or do the yard or whatever we do, or clean the house or whatever, I will, as the caller, bring moderation into that. If I see her imbalance and she takes it to an extreme, where all of a sudden she's spending 20 hours a day neglecting schoolwork, everything. Wait. I wanted you to do this within the parameters of my guidelines.
Right.
One thing we know about Jesus, he said, look, all of those of you who are weary and heavy laden, come to me and I will give you rest. Take on my yoke. It's easy and it's not a burden. Well, some of us, some people get into Christian ministry and they say, how can he say that? This is a burden. And a lot of pastors, for instance, just get absolutely worn out, and they even lose marriages and bad relationships with children, etc., because they've devoted themselves to the flock. And yet the question is that a calling that Jesus gave to him, or did he call him to the pastorate, but call him to a daily hearing the voice of the shepherd? Jesus said the same, my sheep hear my voice. The shepherd always gives perfect balance to a life of calling. Calling without a caller always can lead to, back to what we talked about in Ecclesiastes, just striving and rivalry and emptiness. But even with a caller and then disassociating ourselves from the continued hearing of the voice is problematic as well. We got the call, we were certain we got the call, this is what the Lord wants me to do in my life. And then in some way we begin to sneak away and we're more concerned about the calling than hearing his voice. Jesus made it very clear in John 15, apart from me you can do nothing. So it's our engagement into the branch, into the vine as a branch, our attachment to that gives us life and vigor and balance and moderation. So, and also a place where he moves us around where we don't fall into pride and arrogance, and he may pull us off the scene for a while or put us back in or put us into a place where he says he wants to serve for a while and not be the front, or, you know, all the different things that he can do to moderate that. But it's not just a caller and then we're away, it's a caller and then it's the ongoing call. Mm. So calling to me is not a one-time call, it's an ongoing relationship with the one I'm yoked with, which is Jesus, who then gives me peace. And it's not burdensome. And that's the balance. And so I think there's a clear distinction between secular calling, or a sense of calling anyway, without a caller, and just rivalry and I've got to be great and have success, and then a beautiful balance in between a true caller who then cares about his sheep and continues that balance throughout life. Well,
and there is that is that balance. If we look at things like 23rd Psalm that says, sometimes I'll be led to pastures, sometimes I'll be led to water, sometimes I'll be led through the valley of the shadow of death. That all comes from following his lead. It doesn't change who I am. As a sheep, I may be shorn year after year to provide this beautiful thing unto the Lord. And so he may take the work that I'm doing and create wonderful things in his kingdom through the stuff that we've done, and yet we're following him all the way through the hard times and the easy times.
Absolutely. And Jeff, think too about David. I mean, David was called as a king, as a type, as a shadow of the ultimate king who would come. The Davidic covenant was that one of your descendants would sit on your throne forever. David saw and kind of looked forward, and then at some point what we get a picture of David. It says, in the season when kings went out to battle, he was a king, he was called as a king, and he wasn't listening to the voice, and that's when the great fall happened with Bathsheba, and he ended up being complicit with murder, and he was found in an adulterous affair, and all these different things happened. He was out of step with the caller. So a part of the call is to be in step with the caller. We're never perfect. We fail in so many different ways. We stumble in many ways. And David was certainly forgiven. It cost him a lot, but he was forgiven. But our point is that we want to stay as close to the vine as we can get. And that brings peace, a burden-free life. Not that there's not great sacrifice, but it doesn't diminish our joy. It may diminish momentary happiness, but it doesn't. It continues to deliver in terms of that fullness of joy that Jesus promised.
Well, it's always something, that's going to try to pull us off the mark. Always something that's going to, and even excellence can pull us off the mark when we just focus so severely on that we forget to hear the voice of God.
Yeah, and no question. And don't think that Christian ministry of any way is in any way exempt from building up pride and making us pompous and arrogant. And I mean, anything can. Our flesh loves to feed off anything it can get, and if it's being starved, it'll even aggressively seek to try to grab onto that pride and all those things. I think ultimately the way we keep our balance, we just recognize that it's Christ in us, and it's I'm a failure, I'm a loser in and of myself, but with Christ I'm a profound winner. I'm an ambassador. I'm a saint. I'm part of a priesthood. It's powerful.